that one up. So to kick this off, we're going to talk about Retention Center. We'll go into student engagement with the flipped classroom and then talk about discussions. But Ashley's going to talk a little bit about the Retention Center and how instructors can use it. So I'll turn it over to you, Ashley.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you this Friday, or at least bits and pieces of you on my screen. So when I was teaching, I was primarily in general education courses. And so I was seeing students their very first time in college, trying to kind of get their foot through the door when they haven't quite learned the habits of healthy students. And so the Retention Center was a really useful tool for me to try and monitor everybody, because when you're teaching 7 classes and those classes each have 30 students, without a system, it's really easy for people to fall through the cracks. So I'm going to very quickly share my screen with you guys to give you an idea of what the Retention Center looks like. Hold on one second for me. I'm going to try and share my screen with you. Here we go. So in any class that you're labeled as an instructor in, you're going to see a Retention Center. And if you look down that table of contents menu, which is this left side gray bar, underneath the course tools, there's a section labeled evaluation, and the third option in there is the Retention Center. And so this is just a kind of a fake Retention Center that I set up with Cameron and Mark to give you an idea of what it looks like. So what the Retention Center does is it actually monitors at-risk behaviors for students, and it gives you an overview of how you're acting in a class. So this gray section at the bottom kind of gives you an idea of everything that you've done in the course. This is a sandbox class where I kind of experiment, so I don't have any assessments in it. But if I did, you would see like every test or Dropbox right here. It's showing me all of the things that are supposed to be interactive to give me an idea of how I'm engaging with students, how many discussion boards do I have, how frequently am I responding on them. This learner support gives you an idea of how you're communicating with students. And then the course design, every time you go in and like create an announcement or add a new Dropbox, it gives you a list. So it's a great way of going, well, here's everything I've done in this class. And it was super helpful for me when I was teaching multiple versions of the same section. So maybe I found a typo in an announcement and I wanted to make sure I fixed it in every section. The course design tells you that. The most useful part of the Retention Center, though, is actually these columns right here. So these 4 columns are monitoring at-risk behaviors for students. If you use the Blackboard, the due date function that comes when you're creating like a discussion board or a test, and a student misses a deadline, they'll get a red dot right here. So you know everybody who missed that deadline in a single place instead of having to look through your grade book or the Dropbox. A grade alert, it defaults to telling you whether or not the student's average is 25% below the class average, but you can also go in and change that to whatever you want. So when I was teaching, I used to have my grade alert set at 70. Anytime your grade dropped from or below a 70%, I got a notification so that I could reach out to you and get you back on track. The activity alert lets you know whether or not a student is engaged in the class 20%, less than 20% of everyone else. So if everybody else is logging in 10 times a day and your student is not meeting that criteria, that's when you're going to get that alert. And then an access alert lets you know whether or not a student has logged in the last 5 days. And so the thing I like about the Retention Center is this is really letting me know, is this student holding a chair in place or are they present in class? Are they just, showing up, or are they doing the work? Are they doing the work with the quality that's actually going to get them the grade that they want? And one of the great things about the Retention Center is it makes it really easy to communicate with groups of students who may fall into these categories. So you can see that there's this red bar across the top, and what that red bar is telling me is I have 3 students who are at risk. In this case, it's my preview user, Cameron and Mark. And if I click on that red bar, I can actually hit a notification and email every person who falls into that category. So if I really easily wanted to reach out, I could hit notify. It's going to open up the email client, and I can just send a very quick email that says, hey, I noticed that you have not logged into this class in the last 5 days. Reach out, let me know what's going on so we can get you back on track. And for me, having all of that information in a central location makes it a lot easier to keep track of what's going on with these students instead of trying to make individual notes in my gradebook and then make individual notes on my attendance roster and then make individual notes with my due dates. Like, this keeps it all in one place. And just because a student has one alert doesn't necessarily mean that I need to be monitoring them. But when I see a student has 2 or 3, like, that's when I'm concerned about those students. And you can actually customize these by clicking in this upper right-hand corner. That's a little more extensive of a process, and we've got some training videos on that I'd be happy to share, but I'm not going to dive into that today. The other great thing about this retention center is, right now I'm sort of seeing people in comparison to each other, but if I wanted to look at an individual user, I could click on their name and it's going to pull up individual data on them. So first, it's going to show me how they performed based on each of the alerts, but then there are also some really great features here. If I wanted to add a note, I could click and just add a note here. So let's say that Cameron is a dual enrolled student, and I wanted to keep that in mind just to make sure that, hey, that even if your school closes, you still got to show up for class. Well, now I've got all of that information here, and I've got this great kind of notification history there as well. I could also click notify, and if you click notify through this option, not only do you send an email to the student, but you actually keep a record right here as well. And normally if you're sending a notification or an email through Blackboard, it's really using your school email address, so you'd have to search there for it. And I just want to show you an example of how I use this, and I've lower the screen so you couldn't see the student's name. But this was a student who was in a humanities class I taught a couple of semesters ago. And so you can see here I have these 2 notifications that are, these 2 notes that I made on the student. This was a student who was dual enrolled. This is a student who did not submit the midterm project. I sent out a test email just so you guys could see how it worked, but you can see here's where I sent an alert to the student. I can look and see here are the 9 items that this student missed. Here's the student's average. The student's activity is going to be a 0 because this class hasn't been taught in 2 semesters, but I can also say this student hasn't logged in 209 days, which, normally that number is going to hopefully be under 5, but having it all in one location makes it really easy to identify the students who might need a little bit of an extra push to keep them engaged. And being able to reach out or say, hey, here's a record of everything I tried to do made it a lot easier for me when I needed to have some of those more difficult discussions with students. Normally around midterms, I would have what I call a sit-down session with my students where I'd say, look, here's how many points we have left in the semester. Here's how many points you have. Here's everything that I tried to do to get you to do your work. What are you going to do differently to ensure that you pass? And trying to keep that in my head for 180 students individually just didn't work, but the retention center can be a really great tool to kind of alleviate some of that challenge. The last thing I want to make sure you guys know about this individualized retention setting is, let's just say Cameron is a real problem student. Cameron is late to class every day. She comes in with Starbucks. She never brings me any Starbucks. And I just want to make sure I keep an eye on Cameron. If I click
finger gestures here, what?
If I click this monitor button, what ends up happening is Cameron will actually appear on the side of the retention center. So this is a really small class with only 3 students, but you might have a class with 25 students. And so maybe I don't want to look through those 25 students. Well, now Cameron's in a special section. And so it's really easy for me to kind of get a quick snapshot of what's going on with her by looking at that side column. So I wanted to make sure you knew that this tool was there. If you have any questions about it, or you want to set it up to do something different, maybe you just want to use it to monitor your final exam deadline, or you want to use it to identify your high performing students. Maybe I want an alert for people who have, an average above 90 in the class. We can do those things. As Mark said, just feel free to reach out or send us an email so that we can help you set this up. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing. And I'm going to go ahead and toss this back to you, Mark. Whoa.
I can't hear Mark. Can anybody else hear him?
Oh, thanks. I had only
Okay.
on mute. Well, thank you, Ashley, for the Retention Center. And welcome to the people that just joined us during the Retention Center thing. As we kind of went over in the beginning, Ashley went over Retention Center. I'm going to talk about how to engage students with flipped classrooms, and then Cameron's going to talk about discussions. But one thing we got a lot of responses from instructors asking us how do we engage students. So we kind of have a lot planned for you in different ways to engage students. The interesting thing about student engagement is it's a pretty wide topic. You know, we talk about certain things like multimedia theory of learning or do, and it's kind of backed up by what we know of how the brain thinks. So it's a bit harder science than engagement. You get into student engagement, things do kind of depend on your discipline, like what works for you, what instructional methods work for you to engage the students, how does it interface with the different disciplines you teach. So today I'm actually going to speak specifically on something I did for a class I was teaching. The course was web development. It's basically building websites. And it's actually a very psychomotor driven class because you spend your time really we're trying to get them to build websites. So that's what we really want them to do. So I used a couple of different instructional methods to help engage the students. And again, might work for your discipline, might not, depending on what you did. But one of the big things was the flipped classroom concept. So the flipped classroom concept is instead of me standing up there and lecturing to the student or going through a PowerPoint and trying to transmit the information to them that way, we outsource that to outside the classroom. So traditionally, you know, I would lecture, give a PowerPoint, then they would go home and do the work themselves as homework assignments or so. So when you flip that, instead it was like before class, read the textbook, watch this video, here's the knowledge you need. But now when you come to class, what we're doing at home is homework, you're going to do right here. And the advantage of that is now the instructor is there. I basically was on my feet during the whole class, walking around, monitoring the students' work. And the advantage of the flipped classroom concept is if you're just lecturing to somebody, sometimes students zone out, and so you're not really being very engaging. So if they do the videos beforehand and they came into class, now I can engage them. You know, they might feel me physically standing behind them, peering over their shoulder. I can actually monitor like the whole class and see like if everybody has the wrong idea in something, I can adjust and give a little mini lecture, you know, 5-10 minutes right there on the spot to help correct that. And if it's not like the whole class is off on a tangent, well then I just help that one person. The huge advantage of this kind of tactic is certain times I could see they were making mistakes that they didn't know enough that they should even ask a question. They didn't recognize their mistake or know they should ask me for guidance. And I was able to pop in and give them some guidance and feedback. So it really increases the amount of feedback you can give to your students there. And it wasn't the fact they actually didn't have enough time to do all of their homework in class with me, but it was enough to kind of get them started. So one phrase we use in the flipped classroom concept is instead of being the sage on the stage, coach on the side. And so it's more of a kind of a coaching model where I'm trying to coach them into correctness. But on top of the flipped classroom concept, which is ideal by itself, I use an instructional method called peer instruction. And peer instruction is powerful. You know, early on, educators used to think the behaviorist model, you know, open brain, pour in knowledge, you know, student gets it that way, but it's not the case. If that was the case, we wouldn't need teachers. They would just go to the library and learn everything they needed. So learning is a social experience, which is what teachers help, instructors help kind of guide that learning experience process for the students. And so in that, sometimes the students kind of get it when you explain it. Other times they benefit more from a fellow student explaining it. If you're speaking on your discipline, you're already an expert. You might have worked 20 years in the field, taught it for 15 years. But if they talk to their fellow students might be kind of in the same boat they are. It's like, oh, I just kind of grasped this concept. I just kind of made sense of it last night. And sometimes the way the other student explains it can kind of get through to the student when possibly you weren't successful. So that's the idea of peer instruction. And so what I did in this course is I would group students with 2 to 3 groups, 2 to 3, and they would work together. And this is great for knowledge sharing. I would try and assign the groups. So sometimes you'd have a knowledgeable person with the less knowledgeable, and it's knowledge sharing. Specifically in my class, since one of them is programming at the computer, we had a rule that only one person could be on the keyboard at a time. The other 2 had to act as advisors. The other 1 or 2 students had to act as advisors. They could kind of give you advice on what to type, but they couldn't type for you. That would help alleviate the problem of the students, like, oh, just let me in there, and then you have people doing a third of each thing. What you really want them to do is all work on it together, so they're all kind of sharing that knowledge. Now, what I did periodically in this course is periodically I would set up a few labs that were individual. They had to do it individually. And then my observation of them doing the individual labs helped me assess if a student was coasting on the knowledge of another student, and then I could help correct that student and say, okay, you need to know this. So that helped identify having a mix. It was mostly peer instruction, but every now and then I did some solo labs to kind of nudge the student into understanding and make sure that they knew what they were doing. And that was in addition, of course, to solo assessments, which we had, quizzes and tests. So I wanted to do the labs because I wanted to catch the student before he had a graded exam or a graded test, or I shouldn't say like these were all graded, but my labs were formative. They were low stakes grades. And so I wanted to catch the student at a low stakes time, so we could kind of nudge them into, okay, you need to know this before a high stakes grade was coming up to assess them. So that was peer instruction. And to give you a background on peer instruction, it was kind of developed by a Harvard physics professor, where he had, I'm probably I'll share the video with people. That'll be a great one to watch when I talked about having that community of practice sessions. But this Harvard professor recognized his students, kind of like he wasn't getting through to them sometimes in these physics explanations, but when he did the peer instructions and had them in groups, sometimes they were successful explaining it to each other. One thing I might mention about peer instruction is one good method to use, especially if you're doing virtual sessions. We have these polling, these multiple choice questions. That's fantastic to gauge your students at once. And you can do that in a class by having people raise their hands, things like that. What you might want to do in a class is kind of what I was doing by observation. But if 70% of your students kind of have the right answer and 30% don't, well, you might benefit by, having the students get together as a group and explain it to each other. But on the low scale, if only like maybe 20% of your students have the right answer, well, maybe they'd probably benefit more by you as the expert explaining it to everybody. So you got to try and find that sweet spot between 30 to 70% is what some people do as a marker. If it's between 30 and 70%, it's great for peer instruction. Like if less than 30% of your class really understands the material, you probably need to explain it to them. And if more than 70% understand the material, it might be good just to kind of move on and keep going. But that's a peer instruction, and there's a lot to it, and we can actually talk about that in the future a little bit more, because I think that's a very powerful concept. probably even more powerful than the flipped classroom, but usually they're used in conjunction together a lot. The other thing I actually did, and this depends on your discipline if this is possible and your time constraints, I used mastery learning in this course. I had a certain project that they kept working on throughout the semester, and they had to keep building upon this. And they would have milestones where they'd have to turn in this project. So I would give this, when I would go, I would give them a grade, I would give them feedback on what they had done. But when I gave them back the project, it was like, you have to fix this. You can't just you can't get an 80 and move on. It's like, you got an 80, now go and fix everything. Because until it's fixed, it's not even going to work when you move to the next section, because we're going to be building on the same project. And I would actually allow them to up their grades if they fixed everything. Because, you know, in most classes, you get a 70, you move on. You got 70% of the material mastered in Unit 1. Maybe you master Unit 2, 80% of the material. But I actually wanted to try and get them to master 100% of the material. So it was feedback, handed back to you, you fix it. We'll work together if you need to, but you need to learn everything, 100% of the material, so we can move forward. I actually find this helps a lot, because sometimes you get to a student at the end of the course, and if they've only mastered 70 or 80% in each unit, then they have huge gaps. And I'd rather somebody master 100% of the material going forward to build upon each other, and that's mastery learning. So it depends on your subject matter. You may not have the time constraints, or you may have more time constraints than I had, that you couldn't keep grading things and keep it moving. And you might have different work, but in web development, it worked having a single project that they kept building and working on. So I use those three things in this course: the flipped classroom concept, peer instruction, and mastery learning. We're going to go ahead and move on soon, and I'll turn it over to Cameron. But before we do that, did anybody have any questions
Mark,
or curiosities about those three?
Mark, I wanted to let you know you have a question in the chat that says, did your students come to class typically prepared?
Yeah. Well, that's actually one of the challenges you face in a course like this. So what I found was, at first, that was the case. A lot of students came unprepared, but then when they had to deal with me physically, like looking over their shoulder and them not knowing what to do, it kind of made them feel, I think, a little bit uncomfortable. And then they had to work with peers and they couldn't contribute. And so what I saw was the majority of the class, right after that first, as soon as that first or one or two class sessions after they figured out how it was working, they started to prepare, because they didn't want to seem unprepared. Now, the important thing I would say is that if the students came unprepared, I didn't say, okay, well, let me just lecture and give you the information. I would let them feel uncomfortable not knowing the information. Because if they felt that, like, oh, I'll just come here and you're going to lecture me anyway, yeah, they wouldn't have read, they wouldn't have watched the video, they wouldn't have prepared. So sometimes you have to let them struggle in the beginning, feel a bit uncomfortable, so they say, okay, next time I'm going to prepare. Hey, any other questions about flipped classroom, mastery learning, peer instruction? All right. Well, so moving on, and we can actually have a question and answer section for everything at the end of this. But now we're going to move into how to engage students with discussions in an online environment, and Cameron's going to lead us on that. So I'll turn it over to you, Cameron.
Thank you. Those were interesting topics. I would like to talk a lot about those. We probably put too many topics in here.
Yeah, this is the sampler platter for distance education.
Yeah. All right, so this is Discussions are, I don't know, some people love them, some people hate them. And for a lot of people, they just have them in the class because it's an easy way to get the student interaction that's required for online classes and hybrid classes. But it's not the only way. So discussions need to be in a class if there are no required collaborate sessions or group work or Flipgrid. There's other ways of getting student interaction in class. And so discussion should be doing a lot more than just meeting that requirement if you use discussions. And I've always found that every class is so different. A discussion that works so well in one class completely bombs in a class the next semester, or the same class the same semester. And so every semester I'm having to, work a couple of weeks ahead and think, okay, this one's not going so well. What am I going to do differently for the next discussion? And what can I change to try to encourage more participation? And so one thing that I do is put up this template in the Start Here section. And this is for students responding to other student writing. And so it's like a review kind of discussion. I do those a lot. Students post something that they're going to, a rough draft of something that they're going to submit to me as a final draft for grading. But before they submit it for a grade, they submit it to the discussion board to get feedback. And so I've put this template up to help students come up with ways to respond to other students' writing. And they don't have to use these specific sentences. They can use these specific sentences. And I think that at least having the template to look at gives them an idea of what to look at in other students' writing. And so that's one thing that I found about discussions, is that the more specific I am with what has to be in their replies, the better material I get. And so here's an example of my instructions for one particular discussion. Their original post has to contain a link to an article, and then this is the kind of material that they have to put about the article, and then they have to respond to other students with at least 3 comments on the other student's work. And I always like to put sentence counts in there. And I do, in my Start Here section, have a list of rules for discussions, excuse me, and I include good job, great work, nice, don't count as sentences in the sentence count. I also like to add a link to an audio clip of the instructions, and I use SoundCloud generally, and grab the link to the audio file from there and post it behind, in this case, my picture. Sometimes I'll use another picture or something to put up the audio instructions. And then I allow students to use audio for their responses to the discussion topic. Unless, of course, it's something that I really want to assess their writing, I allow them to post their reply in audio format instead. My last class, I used Flipgrid instead of doing the audio, and I found that to be a much more engaging format for discussion. Students like being able to see the facial expressions of their peers. We'll stop this. It's very difficult to tell. You've even noticed in colleagues' emails when we're not meeting, what emotion is behind a sentence when it's in writing. And it's a lot easier when you see somebody explaining something to empathize with their message. And so Flipgrid has been very successful with my students for, excuse me, for developing those relationships with each other that keep them wanting to participate and wanting to come to class. All right, that is all I have there, and my throat's going out. So anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I've got a comment. I really like the templates. I think it's really good because in a pre-COVID environment, we'd kind of go over with students that were signing up for online classes that just by the nature, online classes do require more reading and writing. So sometimes you'd have a self-select student. The ones more comfortable with writing would be taking online classes. But with the COVID thing, so many people got thrown into online classes, so they may not be as equipped as great writers. So I do think having a template for them is very helpful to give them some ideas about how to get started. So I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, and it also helps to have a rubric and let them see the rubric before they complete the assignment, so that they know if they're going to be graded on grammar, how much the sentence count is worth, how much the replies are worth, etc. So that works too.
And I think one of the great benefits of the rubric is you can easily attach that rubric to the discussion board to help expedite how you're grading those responses. So you can sort of use the rubric in calculating the grade and then provide individualized additional feedback. I'm sorry, I didn't think to ask if anyone had any questions about the retention center. So I did just want to take this opportunity to double check. Is there anything that you guys wanted to know about the retention center that we did not cover?
I have a comment about that one. Whenever I have used the send a message from the retention center, students that I've been trying to get in touch with the whole semester just through regular email somehow wake up and respond when it comes from the retention center.
I think one of the things that's great about it is the retention center, like the email, the client defaults to telling you something that you have done has triggered this. So it'll say your grade average triggered this warning, or your failure to log in has triggered this warning. And when students see the word trigger, they want to double check on it.
Yeah, one thing I'll throw out on discussion boards as well. I mean, it is possible you don't have to grade on grammar. Certain people say that you can kind of keep it more fluid because you just want to just keep the students talking and sharing ideas. Both Ashley and Cameron come from a English teacher background, so they might be more strict on grammar than most classes would be.
Not at all.
So, yeah.
Different discussions have different purposes. Sometimes I say grammar counts, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's about generating ideas and saving grammar corrections till later. Sometimes it's a more formal discussion in which all of the communication features count. So it's up to the day.
Yeah, one thing I'd always point out to students too, that I appreciate when they say things to other students like good job, or oh, I really like your idea, but I would say you're not adding value to the conversation. That is a great it's social lubricant. It is nice that we compliment people, we admire them, and offer that praise, but that doesn't necessarily count what I would consider as a discussion board response. You want to add something of value, just like you were in a conversation with another student, in a physical conversation. Like, do you have a comment about their idea? Can you offer a different perspective? A very nice constructive critique, or tell them what parts of their argument you agree with or what parts you disagree with. And I try not to discourage the good job post, but I just let them know that you need to have some substantive posts as well.
Just because we did mention the rubrics in this conversation, and feel free to answer this question in the chat instead of starting a poll, do you all know how to attach a rubric from Blackboard to a discussion board? Would it be helpful if we showed that to you real quick?
Sure. Well, I don't know if I have one set up in here. Let me look. Give me a couple of minutes to look and see what I have set up in here already.
I have one set up that I can show real quick.
Oh, okay.
So I said that, and then I was like, where's the screen share button?
Yeah.
Give me 1 second because I want to make sure I don't accidentally click on anything that's going to show you guys students' grades or anything. All right, so when you are creating a discussion board, the place to do this is actually under the course tools. And you can set this up as you're creating them. Maybe I lied, I thought I had one. So underneath these options, in order to use a rubric, you have to first enable the grade discussion forum option. And then if you click right here to add a rubric, if you have an existing rubric already available, you can use your existing rubric by clicking create from existing, and every rubric that you have listed will be right here. If you have a new rubric that you want to create, just click the create new rubric option. And I lied, Cameron, I thought I had a rubric in this course, but I guess I have it enabled in my other sandbox. But that will automatically attach the rubric. And when you look at the students' submissions, instead of having to individually provide feedback, there'll be a select rubric option underneath the actual grade for the discussion. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to turn the screen sharing off so I can pull one up without showing you student grades. There we go. And so, Mark mentioned that Cameron and I teach English. I also teach the humanities class, and for, I don't know, maybe the last 3 years, there hasn't been a class that had less than 22 students in it. And so when you're going in and grading 22 students' discussion boards and you're trying to provide individualized feedback on those discussion boards, that can very quickly become an overwhelming or an exhausting experience. And so using that discussion board rubric tool made it a lot easier to actually provide them that feedback quickly rather than going in and having to individually type the comments from the rubric itself. All right, hold on 1 second. I'll turn the screen sharing option back on. This is Museum of Me assignment. Is the screen actually sharing? Yeah. my audio just went out.
I can hear you, but I don't see your screen. Now
You see it now?
Yeah.
So when you're grading a student's discussion, oh, good Lord, I just reset it. I don't know what I did, guys. I accidentally reset it. But normally what you'll see when you click right here is it'll say grade rubric, and it'll automatically pull the rubric up. And I'm thinking just because this is a class from several semesters ago that I just tried to go and change students' grades in, it won't let me pull it up. But that's where it'll appear when you click on that grade icon, and you can just select the options. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, well, one thing I might take a moment to kind of go over some housekeeping and things like that, and then we can go back to questions. Anybody has any questions? Distance Ed has talked about, we'll have like coffee break with Distance Ed, kind of a social time. You can kind of log in. In the pre-COVID days, we had a little coffee set up. Instructors could just stop by the office, have a cup of coffee with us and chat. So it could be about anything, just chatting about your day, or if you got questions about theoretical models or Distance Ed, whatever. So we'll have some sessions where you can just come join us for a coffee break. Also, we're trying to initiate like a community of practice group at our school. And so community of practice for online instructors is basically an instructor guided group where you kind of guide the curriculum that you want to go over and study. Everybody's interested in honing their craft. So the first one, we have a video everybody's going to watch, and we can come there for a discussion. So again, there's no presentation when you come there, but everybody will watch the same discussion, and we can talk about student engagement. The video is going to be how to engage students in asynchronous online courses. We're also going to be offering training coming up next year on things like how to engage students in virtual class sessions for people that are having live remote sessions, and many other topics. Ashley, Cameron, do you guys have any other housekeeping issues you want to add to that?
Put up a question in the poll asking whether anybody uses Flipgrid. So if y'all wouldn't mind replying real quick in the poll with that, I'd appreciate it. That's it for me.
Okay, great. I had to look for a second. If the poll doesn't appear, you have to click the view poll icon at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, next to the hand raised one, right?
Right, next to the hand raising. So I had to click that to view it.
Okay.
And one thing I'll add, you're welcome to contact me at any time. Feel free to shoot me an email. We can set up a collaborate session to discuss whatever you might like. I'm happy to talk in between semesters if people have questions about how to improve their classes or how to do different instructional models, better discussion boards, or anything you might want to discuss.
Huh. Looks like the poll's not working out for y'all.
Yeah, I can't click it either.
The same experience. I had to quickly exit Collaborate because none of my button icons were working. So it may work if you click reload.
All right. Can y'all just jot a yes or a no in the chat if you use Flipgrid? Awesome. Thank you. Great to know. Okay. So we're wrapped up here, right, Mark?
Yeah, but we can be around if anybody has any last minute questions.
And if not, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody.
Happy weekend. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye for now.
Bye, everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thank you so much.
I am absolutely convinced that my Surface Pro is possessed by the devil.
Hey, I do have a quick question. Can you two hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
I can hear you.
This is probably a Blackboard thing. When I go into the retention center, it shows one grade, which is the grade I like to see. But for some reason, in my grade book, it shows the grade like everybody has an F. So the only place I can see what their real grade is in the class based on the number of points is in the retention center. I know in training somewhere I was showed how to show the real grade in air quotes, but I can't figure out how to do it.
What course is it?
It is my Security Plus.
Can you search the CRN?
Give you the these CRN number.
It should be somewhere on like the left-hand side of the screen towards the top at that little gray bar.
Yeah, let me log in real quick. It is 12288. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I'm not quite sure what grade the students see in the grade book either.
So if you click on Grade Center and then you click Full Grade Center, it looks like you don't have or it looks like the item that's labeled total that's on the far right side of your grade book. That's what their grade in the class.
Wait, let me get
And
there.
when you're looking at far right, so it's next to attendance in your grade book.
Yes, okay, I see that.
That's what they're seeing as their grade in your course.
Yeah, I have no idea what that number means.
So, well, that's not good.
No, I know what it means, but like it doesn't feel like
What
a grade.
grade do you want them to see as their grade in your class? That weighted total?
I want them to see the grade that shows in the retention center.
So let's see what grade you have set in the retention center. So the grade that you have set in the retention center, where it says grade rule, the retention center is looking at what you have told the grade book their actual external grade is. So if you want the retention center to use a different option, you have to tell the grade book to use a different option. But when they don't see the retention center at all, no student has access to that. That's only for instructors.
So that grade that shows in the retention center is their actual external grade currently.
So when you look in the retention center, are you looking at the retention center or the performance dashboard?
Like if I go to the retention center and I click on a student, it shows a grade under grade alerts. But I don't know what that grade seems to be the far right total divided by the total number of points that's left. But I can't see that.
So your challenge then is that you have your column set up differently. So if you'll go back to your full grade center and then go back to that total column, next to it, if you hover over the word total, you'll see a drop-down menu, and you want to click the Edit Column Information option. And I don't want to go through this too fast, so just let me know when you're ready for me to move forward.
Okay.
And so when you're there, there's an option that says primary display. You have the primary display set up to score. And so when it's set up to score, it's going to calculate points. If you want that grade to display as a percentage, you need to change it there to percentage.
Oh, thank you so much. That
No
did it.
problem. I
I'm
hate
sorry.
math. It takes me forever to figure that out.
Yeah. Chester, someone else set this up for me because it's my first semester. So, thank you. You just solved my problem.
I do it.
Appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Jonathan. Yeah, you mentioned you were
And-
teaching an online class next semester. I'm happy to get with you anytime, talk about different things you can do. Because it is
that'd be
different
great.
when you go from face-to-face or blended learning. It's kind of a different animal when you do an online course.
Yeah. I'm
We have
expecting
lots
it
of
to
things
be
we can
fun.
share with you about that.
That'll be great. So I'll be scheduling some time since I'll be going from hybrid
Okay.
to online, just to make sure everything's
Yeah.
good to go. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
No problem. Bye.
Yeah.
I hate this Surface Pro. So I attached the rubric because I thought I had it set up in that sandbox, but I have 3. So I went to the wrong sandbox and I was like, all right, well, I'll just do it really quickly. And then it stopped letting me click between classes. So I was like, no, I'm not trying to show the gradebook for this humanities class. I'm going to chuck this device out the window. I really am.
My husband hates his Surface Pro too. I hear the same thing from him every day.
I love it for artistic stuff. Like, it's cool to draw on the screen, but in hindsight, this was probably the worst work from home device. I mean, yesterday I couldn't even get it to restart, but I think that session went really well.
Yeah.
I did want to tell you two, and I forgot until after I'd already told them Happy Thanksgiving. I went into the Microsoft Forms and set up a 4-question form for for people to give feedback on the training sessions. And I've just been duplicating it and attaching it to stuff, but I can start putting that in so that they can give us feedback on how we did, or we can at least have something that's tracking how many people are rating or coming to these and what they think of them in case we ever need it for the future.
I think the highest, people were popping in and out the whole time, but I think the highest I saw was 20.
Yep. Or I guess we could send it to them after if we really want or need the feedback. I just don't know if we need to track that for any real purpose, or if it would be anything beyond them just giving us suggestions, which I know they already do with the survey we send out.
Yeah, we should keep attendance.
Oh, and I recorded this session. So let me